Hello, and welcome to Super English Talks. I am very happy that you're here with me today. If this is your first time listening, thank you for joining. If you have listened before, welcome back. This podcast is a place where we learn English and talk about useful and interesting ideas. So if you want to improve your English listening and speaking and learn something helpful for your life at the same time, you are in the right place. I still remember that day very clearly. It was a warm afternoon, but my hands were cold. My heart was beating fast. I was sitting in a small classroom, waiting for my turn to speak. The teacher had asked everyone to introduce themselves in English. Just one simple sentence, "My name is Jara, that's all." But when my turn came, I felt completely blank. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My voice, my words, my courage, they all disappeared. You know that feeling when your mind is full of words in your own language, but your tongue refuses to move in English? That was me. I felt like there was a wall between my thoughts and my mouth. I wanted to say something simple, something normal, but fear was louder than my voice. Everyone looked at me, kind eyes, patient smiles, but that made it worse. I felt small, invisible, silent. The teacher waited for a few seconds, and then she gently said, "It's okay. Take your time." Those words were kind, but they also cut deep. Take your time. I had been taking my time for years, and still, English felt like a mountain I couldn't climb. When I finally spoke, my voice was shaking. "My name Jara is," and then my tongue froze again. The whole class waited, quiet. I could hear my heart beating in my ears. "My name is Jara," I tried once more, and somehow, the words came out soft, broken, but alive. "My name is Jara." The teacher smiled. The class clapped softly. It was over. But inside, I felt something heavy, not because I failed, but because I had seen how weak my voice sounded in another language. I realized then that learning English was not only about grammar or vocabulary. It was about finding my voice again, in a new world of sounds. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that short moment, how hard it was just to say my name. I thought about the people who spoke English easily. They didn't look afraid. Their words moved like water, smooth, confident, alive. I wanted that. I wanted to speak like that. But how? I didn't know where to start. So I sat by my window and listened to the street, to the wind, to the city breathing outside. And in that silence, I realized something small but powerful. Every sound, every rhythm, every word starts with listening. Before you can speak, you must learn to listen deeply. I began to listen to English, not just study it. I listened to people talking in movies, to songs on the radio, to strangers on buses. At first, I didn't understand much. It was all fast, like a river of words rushing past me. But slowly, I began to hear the rhythm. I started to notice how people's voices changed when they felt something, when they laughed, when they hesitated, when they were angry or kind. It wasn't just English. It was emotion, energy, life. And that's when I understood English is music. Every language has its own rhythm, and to speak it well, you must feel that rhythm inside you. That realization became my first small light in the long dark tunnel of learning English. But of course, understanding that is one thing. Doing it, living it, is another. A few days later, I decided to practice speaking alone. I closed my bedroom door, stood in front of the mirror, and said, "Hello, my name is Jara." It sounded strange, robotic, like a machine repeating words. I tried again, but this time I looked into my own eyes. "Hello, my name is Jara." Still strange. Still empty. Where was the feeling? The connection? I realized that in my own language, when I said my name, it carried emotion, confidence, identity, warmth. But in English, my voice lost all of that. It wasn't really me speaking. It was just my mouth trying to copy sounds. That night, I promised myself something. I would not just learn English. I would become English, not in nationality, but in expression. I wanted my English voice to feel real, alive, emotional, not like a copy, but like me. So I started small. Every morning, I would whisper English words to myself as I got ready for the day. When I brushed my teeth, "Good morning, Leo." When I made breakfast, "I'm cooking eggs." I like eggs. Simple words. Silly sentences. But each one was a tiny step. Because I wasn't just studying, I was living with English. And slowly, something magical started happening. The silence inside me began to break. My thoughts started to come in small English pieces, not full sentences, but words. Coffee. Morning. Tired. Let's go. My mind was learning to think in English, even a little. And that little change made me feel free. I began to see English not as a school subject, but as a voice, a living voice that I could grow, feed, and shape. A voice that could one day express who I really am. That dream of being able to be myself in English became my motivation. But still, I was afraid to speak in front of others. I practiced in secret every night. Sometimes I would record my voice and listen to it. At first, it was terrible. I couldn't believe how strange I sounded. It didn't sound like me at all. My voice in English was different, higher, nervous, almost like someone else. But then I thought, maybe that's normal. Maybe we all have to find our English voice, like a singer learning a new song. And at first, it feels unnatural, but slowly it becomes yours. So I kept going. Every night, I spoke to my mirror. Sometimes I read stories out loud. Sometimes I talked about my day, what I did, what I felt, what I dreamed. And little by little, I felt the rhythm of English growing inside me. The silence was no longer heavy. It was becoming space, a space where my new voice could grow. Still, I knew I needed more. I needed to speak with real people. Because language is alive only when shared. You can't find your full voice in a mirror. You find it in conversation, in mistakes, in laughter. So one evening, I went to a small English club in my city. It was in a coffee shop, just a few people sitting around a table, talking in English. I remember standing at the door for a full minute, afraid to go in. My hand was shaking as I reached for the handle. I almost turned back. But then I thought about that classroom, about that silence, about that promise I made to myself to find my voice. And I walked in. There were 5 people. They were smiling, laughing, talking. One of them looked up and said, "Hey, you're new here. Come, sit." I smiled nervously and sat down. They were speaking fast, and I only caught a few words: work, movie, weekend. I nodded, pretending to understand. And then someone asked me, "So, what do you do?" My heart jumped again. The same silence returned, but this time, I was ready. I took a breath and said slowly, "I work in a small company." Everyone smiled. "Nice. What kind of company?" I didn't know how to explain it. I paused, searched for words, and said, "We sell computers." And they nodded. That's it. Just that. But inside me, something exploded: pride, relief, happiness. I had spoken. I had survived. That night, when I went home, I was smiling the whole way. The silence was gone. My English was not perfect, far from it, but it was alive. It was real. And I realized something I would never forget. The first voice you find in English is small. It's fragile. But it's yours. And that's where fluency begins, not with grammar books, not with vocabulary lists, but with one brave word spoken from your heart. That's how my journey started. Not with a big dream, not with a plan, but with a moment of silence and a whisper of courage. The next morning after that English club, I woke up early. The sun was shining softly through my window, and for the first time in a long time, I felt light, as if something heavy had finally moved from my heart. I had spoken English with real people. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but honestly. I made coffee, and while I watched the steam rise from the cup, I said to myself, "You did it." And then I laughed, because I said it in English, "You did it." And it felt natural. That small sentence filled my whole room with energy. I realized that I had taken my first real step. Not just learning, not just practicing, but living in English. That day, I decided to keep going. I told myself every day, I will take one small step, one real step, to speak better English. It didn't matter how small it was. I just needed to move forward, even a little. So I began a simple habit. Every day, I would talk to one person in English, even for 1 minute. It could be anyone, my classmate, a tourist, someone online, or even a shop assistant. At first, it was scary. My words came out slowly, like a shy child learning to walk. One morning, I went to a small cafe near my school. The waiter smiled and said, "What would you like?" I hesitated, then said softly, "A coffee, please." "Sure," he said. "Hot or iced?" I froze. I didn't understand right away. He repeated, "Hot or iced?" I looked at him, smiled nervously, and said, "Hot." And just like that, I had completed my first English conversation in the real world. It lasted only a few seconds, but it stayed in my mind all day. It was short. It was simple. But it was real. And that's what matters. Later that week, I went back to the cafe again. The same waiter was there. He smiled and said, "The usual?" I didn't know what the usual meant, so I just looked confused. He laughed kindly and said, "You want the same coffee as before?" And then I understood. I laughed too. Yes, the usual. And I said it with confidence this time. I remember walking home that day feeling proud. Not because I spoke perfect English, but because I understood something new, a piece of real, living English. It wasn't from a textbook. It wasn't from a grammar rule. It was from life. That's when I began to realize something very important. Fluency doesn't come from studying more. Fluency comes from living more in English. The world became my classroom. The people became my teachers. And my mistakes became my lessons. Of course, I still made many mistakes. Sometimes people didn't understand me. Sometimes I used the wrong word or my pronunciation was strange. But instead of feeling embarrassed, I started to see each mistake as a friend, a little voice telling me, "You're learning. Keep going." One day, I met a tourist from Canada. She asked me for directions to the train station. I was nervous, but I wanted to help. I said, "Yes, yes, station is this way." And I pointed. She smiled. "Thank you. You speak English?" I said, "A little." And she said, "Well, your English is very good." I laughed because I knew it wasn't true. But her words made me feel strong. Sometimes, one kind sentence can give you energy for weeks. That small moment reminded me why I wanted to learn English in the first place, to connect, to help, to share. English wasn't just a language I needed for work or school. It was a key to understanding people from around the world. And every time I used it, even in small ways, I felt a door opening. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Today I spoke to a tourist. I made mistakes, but I helped someone. English helped me connect." Writing it down made me realize how much one short conversation could change my day. After that, I started to write every day, not just what I did, but how I felt in English. Sometimes I wrote about my fears, sometimes about my progress, sometimes just about the weather. But it wasn't about grammar or spelling. It was about thinking in English. And slowly, writing became another way to listen to my own thoughts in this new language. I began to notice something interesting. The more I wrote, the more natural my speaking became. Because writing forced me to slow down, to find words, to connect ideas. It was like walking before running. A few weeks later, I went to the English club again. This time, I wasn't as scared. I even smiled when I entered the room. They were discussing movies. One person said, "I love action movies." Another said, "I prefer comedies." Then someone asked me, "What about you, Leo?" For a moment, I felt the old fear. But then I remembered my journal. I had written about my favorite movie last night. So I took a deep breath and said, "I like movies with strong stories, where people change." They nodded. "Oh, like drama?" "Yes," I said, "like drama." And they started asking me questions. "What's your favorite movie? Why do you like it?" At first, I answered slowly, carefully choosing words. But soon, I forgot about the mistakes. I was just talking. I was in the moment. And when I left that night, I realized something beautiful. Speaking English is not about speaking perfectly. It's about speaking honestly. It's about letting people see who you are, even if your grammar is wrong. Because what really connects us is not perfect sentences, but real emotion. That thought changed everything for me. I stopped trying to sound fluent. Instead, I tried to sound real. I wanted my English voice to carry my feelings, not just my words. And when I focused on that, something surprising happened. My fluency improved naturally. It's funny how that works. When you stop chasing perfection, your mind relaxes. Your words begin to flow. You stop worrying about mistakes and your voice becomes clearer. That was my second big realization. Fluency is not about speed. It's about connection. From that moment on, I started to enjoy speaking English. I looked for chances to talk, even short ones. At the bus stop, in the cafe, online chat rooms, anywhere I could. Sometimes the conversations were awkward, but they were real. And real conversations build real confidence. Of course, there were still bad days. Some days I couldn't find words. Some days people didn't understand me, and I felt small again. But each time I reminded myself, you're growing. Even when you fail, you're learning. One night, I sat on my bed, listening to an English podcast. The host said something that stayed with me forever. Don't try to speak English perfectly. Try to speak it bravely. Those words became my mantra. Every time I felt nervous, I whispered to myself, just be brave. And that one thought gave me courage. I began to notice progress, slow, gentle progress. I understood more when people talked. I could express more feelings. Sometimes I even dreamed in English, not full stories, just words, sounds, short phrases, but still, it felt like my brain was changing, opening. One morning, I woke up and realized something simple but powerful. English was no longer a stranger to me. It was becoming part of my life. I was not just learning English anymore. I was living it. And all of that began with one small step, one coffee, one smile, one word. When I think about it now, I believe that every learner in the world starts the same way. You stand on one side and fluency feels far away, like a mountain. But you don't climb the mountain in one jump. You take small steps. You make small conversations. You make small mistakes. And suddenly, one day, you look back and realize you've come so far. That is what the first step means. Not the first grammar lesson. Not the first textbook. But the first moment you decide to use English in the real world, even if you're afraid. Because the truth is, courage is more powerful than vocabulary. I wish I could tell you that everything was easy after that first step. That once I found my courage, my English started to grow quickly and smoothly. But the truth is, it didn't. The truth is, there came a time when I felt stuck, lost in the middle of my learning journey. Not a beginner anymore, but not fluent either. That space in between is quiet, heavy, and sometimes painful. It's the space where most learners give up. I remember one evening, sitting at my desk with my English notebook open. I had been studying for hours. My room was full of sticky notes, words, idioms, grammar rules. But even after all that work, when I tried to speak, my mind went blank. The words I had written so carefully on paper refused to come out of my mouth. It felt like I had two different worlds inside me, one full of understanding and one full of silence. I could understand English when I read or listened, but I couldn't speak it freely. And that hurt, because all I wanted was to communicate, to share my thoughts, to be myself. Sometimes I recorded my voice and listened back, just to see if I was improving. But every time I listened, I felt disappointed. I hated the sound of my English voice. It sounded small, unnatural, unsure. It didn't sound like me. And that made me wonder, maybe I would never sound natural. Maybe English was not for me. That thought scared me, because English had become a big part of my dreams. Without it, my world would be smaller again. So I pushed harder. I studied longer, I memorized lists, I repeated phrases. But the more I studied, the more tired I felt. It was like running in circles fast, but going nowhere. One day, my teacher said something that stayed in my mind. "Leo, you don't need more words. You need more feeling." At first, I didn't understand. Feeling? What did emotion have to do with English? But later, I realized what she meant. When you only study words, English becomes mechanical, like building a robot that can talk, but not feel. But when you add emotion, when you speak from your heart, the words start to live. They stop being lines from a book. They become a part of you. Still, I didn't know how to do that. How do you add feeling to a language that isn't yours? How do you make it sound alive? That question stayed with me for weeks. I felt lost. I wanted to quit. One night, I was watching a movie in English. There was a scene where two friends were saying goodbye at an airport. One of them said, "I'll miss you." It was a simple line, 3 words. But the way he said it made me stop breathing for a second. It wasn't the grammar or the pronunciation. It was the emotion. I rewound the scene and listened again. "I'll miss you." His voice cracked a little. There was pain, love, and truth in those words. And I thought, that's what I want. I don't just want to say English. I want to feel English. So, I started a new kind of practice. Every day, I would listen to small scenes from movies, just a few seconds. I would repeat them out loud, trying to copy not just the words, but the emotion behind them. If the character sounded sad, I tried to sound sad. If they were excited, I tried to feel that excitement too. It was strange at first, almost like acting. But slowly, I noticed something changing. When I spoke, my voice had more life. My tone was different. The words started to flow more easily. Because I wasn't thinking about grammar anymore, I was thinking about feeling. That's when I realized something powerful. Fluency is not about speaking fast. It's about speaking with emotion. Once you find the emotion, the rhythm comes naturally. But even with that discovery, the struggle didn't disappear completely. Some days were still hard. I would wake up motivated, practice for an hour, and then forget everything during a real conversation. Other days, people would correct my mistakes, and I would feel small again. One afternoon, I met an English speaker online. We were chatting, and I made a big grammar mistake. He laughed, not in a bad way, just surprised. But that small laugh echoed in my mind for days. I kept hearing it every time I tried to speak. And slowly, my confidence started to fade again. For a while, I avoided conversations. I told myself I was taking a break, but really, I was hiding. I went back to studying alone, reading, listening, watching videos. But no matter how much I studied, something was missing. Because English only comes alive in connection. One evening, I sat by the window, watching the city lights. I felt tired and quiet. I whispered to myself, maybe I'll never be fluent. And then a small voice inside me said, "But you already speak." It was true. I had spoken. I had connected. I had learned. Maybe not perfectly, but honestly. And that's what matters. So, I decided to change my approach again. Instead of running away from mistakes, I would run toward them. If I made an error, I would smile and correct myself. If someone laughed, I would laugh too. Because mistakes are not enemies, they're teachers. After that, I began to collect my mistakes. I wrote them down in a small notebook. Every time I made one, I didn't feel embarrassed. I just added it to the list. Later, I would review them, not to feel bad, but to learn. And slowly, I noticed something beautiful. My list of mistakes became my list of progress. Because each mistake was a moment when I tried. And that's all learning really is, trying again and again until your voice feels right. That change of mindset helped me survive the hardest part of my journey. But the struggle wasn't just about mistakes. It was also about loneliness. Learning English sometimes feels lonely. You hear voices from another world, movies, podcasts, songs, but no one around you speaks it. You start to feel like your English self lives in a different country inside your mind. There were days when I wanted to talk, but I had no one to talk to. So I started recording small voice messages to myself. I would talk about my day, my thoughts, my dreams. I didn't correct anything. I just spoke freely. It felt strange at first, like talking to a friend who lived inside my phone. But that small practice gave me something very important: freedom. When you speak without fear of judgment, your real voice starts to grow. And for the first time, I began to like the sound of my English voice. It was still not perfect. Sometimes my grammar fell apart. Sometimes I forgot words. But I started to hear something honest in it, my true rhythm, my real emotion. It wasn't the voice of a student anymore. It was the voice of a person learning to express himself. And I think that's what fluency really is, the ability to express your heart, not your textbook. One night, I listened to one of my old recordings from months before. I sounded scared, uncertain. Then I listened to a new one, and I could hear the difference. My sentences were smoother. My pauses were natural. My voice carried emotion. I smiled quietly. I didn't need anyone to tell me I had improved. I could feel it. That's when I realized progress in English is often invisible. You don't notice it day by day. It hides in your silence, your effort, your small victories. But when you look back, you see how far you've come. And maybe that's what struggle really is, not something to escape, but something to grow through. Because without struggle, there is no depth. Without mistakes, there is no music in your words. Without silence, there is no story to tell. That was my lesson. The struggle wasn't my enemy. It was my teacher. It taught me patience. It taught me humility. And it taught me to trust the slow magic of practice. There are moments in life when everything changes quietly, not with loud music or celebration, but with one small meeting, one small sentence, one small spark that lights a fire inside you. My turning point came on a rainy afternoon. The sky was gray. The air smelled of wet earth. I was walking to the English club again, not because I felt confident, but because I didn't want to stay home feeling stuck. Sometimes, showing up is all you can do. When I entered the cafe, there were only 3 people there. One of them was a new face, an older man with a kind smile and silver hair. He looked up and said, "Hello there. You must be Leo." I nodded. He said, "I'm Tom. I help run this club sometimes. Have a seat." There was something warm about his voice, calm, steady, welcoming. I sat down and soon we began to talk. Tom asked me about my English journey, and I told him everything: the silence, the mistakes, the frustration. He listened quietly, without interrupting. When I finished, he smiled and said softly, "You remind me of myself." That surprised me. "Really?" I asked. "But your English is perfect." He laughed. "It wasn't always. I learned it too, later in life. And I went through the same things you're going through now." For the next hour, he told me his story, how he moved to another country, how he couldn't speak at first, how he made mistakes and felt lost. But then he said something that changed everything for me. "Leo," he said, "English is not a mountain to climb. It's a river to flow with." I didn't understand at first. He continued, "When you climb a mountain, you fight. You use all your strength. You want to reach the top. But when you enter a river, you move with it. You learn to feel the current, to float, to flow. That's how language works. You can't force fluency. You have to feel it." Those words sank deep into my heart. A river to flow with. It sounded poetic, but also true. He went on, "Stop thinking of English as a problem to solve. Think of it as a rhythm to dance with. Listen to it, feel it, enjoy it. You don't need to fight it. You just need to join it." That simple idea, to stop fighting and start flowing, became the seed of my transformation. After that day, Tom and I met often. He became a mentor, a guide, but also a friend. We didn't just study grammar or vocabulary. We talked about life, about emotions, about confidence, about expression. He taught me to slow down. "Don't rush your words," he said. "Let them breathe." He would ask me to describe my day slowly, with feeling. If I said, "I went to work," he would say, "Tell me more. How did you feel when you woke up? What did the morning smell like?" At first, I laughed. "What does that have to do with English?" He said, "Everything. The more feeling you put into your words, the more alive your English becomes." So I tried it. I woke up early. The air was cold. My hands were sleepy. He smiled. "Good. Now you're not just using English. You're living it." And he was right. When I spoke like that, I could feel the language differently, not as a tool, but as a mirror of my inner world. It wasn't about correct grammar anymore. It was about connection between my mind, my voice, and my heart. Tom also gave me a new kind of exercise. He called it story moments. He said, "Every day, tell one small story in English, even if it's just a moment from your day. But don't just say what happened. Say how it felt." At first, my stories were short and simple. Today it rained. I forgot my umbrella. I got wet. Tom smiled. "Okay, but how did it feel?" I thought for a moment. "Cold. A little funny. Like the rain was laughing at me." He laughed. "Perfect. Now that's English. Real, emotional, human English." That day, something opened inside me. I began to see English not as a list of words, but as a way to paint feelings. Each word was a color. Each sentence a brushstroke. And together, they made a picture, not of perfection, but of meaning. After a few weeks, Tom asked me to tell a story about my childhood in English. It was the first time I tried to speak about something deep and personal in another language. I hesitated, afraid I wouldn't find the right words. But he just said, "Don't worry about words. Speak with your heart." So I began. I talked about my small town, the river where I used to play, my grandmother who always made soup on Sundays. My grammar wasn't perfect. My pronunciation wasn't smooth. But as I spoke, I felt emotion rising inside me. Memories came alive through English. When I finished, Tom's eyes were warm. He said quietly, "Now that was beautiful." I felt something move inside me, a strange mix of relief and joy. For the first time, I wasn't just translating my thoughts into English. I was thinking and feeling in English. That was the moment I realized I had crossed a line from learner to storyteller. From that day on, I practiced storytelling every day. Not big stories, just small moments, a funny bus ride, a new word I learned, a memory from my past. Sometimes I recorded them. Sometimes I shared them with my English club. And every time I told a story, my English grew a little stronger, not because of grammar, but because of emotion. I remember one evening, Tom asked me to tell a story with just one rule: no dictionaries, no notes. I had to speak freely for 2 minutes. I was nervous. He pressed record on his phone and said, "Go." I started talking about my favorite book. At first, I hesitated, searching for words. But soon, the words started to come. Not perfectly, but naturally. I used my hands, my face, my tone. I laughed. I paused. I kept going. When I finished, Tom smiled. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "You see? That's your real English voice." I listened to the recording later that night, and I couldn't believe it. It sounded different. It sounded alive. It wasn't just me reading or repeating. It was me speaking. That night, I sat quietly with my thoughts. I realized that Tom hadn't just taught me English. He had taught me trust. Trust in my own voice. Trust that I didn't need to sound like a native speaker to sound real. Trust that fluency is not perfection, it's connection. And that changed everything. From then on, I began to see English not as a goal, but as a journey, a river I could swim in, sometimes slow, sometimes fast, but always moving. I stopped counting mistakes. I stopped worrying about accents. Instead, I focused on rhythm, emotion, flow. And something amazing happened. When I stopped trying so hard, my English actually improved faster. Because my mind was relaxed. My voice was free. I wasn't fighting the current anymore, I was flowing with it. One day, Tom said to me, Leo, one day you'll help others the way you're learning now. You'll tell them this story. I smiled, not believing him. But he was right. That's why I'm telling it now to you. Because that rainy day with Tom was my turning point. The day I stopped being afraid of English and started enjoying it. The day I learned that fluency is not found in a classroom. It's found in the moments when you open your heart, tell your story, and let your words flow like water. After that rainy afternoon with Tom, I saw English differently. It was no longer a mountain I had to climb. It was a river I could flow with. But to flow, I needed rhythm. I needed to listen. I needed to practice. So that's what I decided to do, to train not just my mind, but my ears and voice. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun was soft. The world outside was quiet. I made some tea, sat by the window, and played a short English podcast. At first, I didn't try to understand every word. I just listened. I closed my eyes and focused on the music of the language. The rise and fall of the voice. The pauses. The rhythm. The emotion between the lines. It felt strange. I had never listened like that before. I wasn't studying. I was feeling. And I realized something powerful. When you listen with emotion, English stops being noise. It starts to make sense. So every morning I listened. Sometimes to short podcasts, sometimes to small parts of movies, sometimes even to songs. I listened not just for meaning, but for music. And soon, I began to notice patterns, the way native speakers stretch some words and swallow others, the way their voices dance around emotions. Tom once told me, fluency begins in the ear, not in the mouth. And he was right. So I decided to train my ear first. Every time I heard a phrase that felt alive like, you know what I mean, or that's crazy, I wrote it down. Then I listened again and repeated it, not reading it, but imitating it. That was the beginning of my new routine, shadowing. At first, it felt almost impossible. The speaker talked fast, and I couldn't keep up. But I remembered what Tom said, flow, don't fight. So instead of trying to copy perfectly, I focused on the rhythm. I let my mouth move freely. Even if I missed a word, I stayed in rhythm. And slowly, something started to change. After a few weeks, I noticed that my English voice felt looser. My tongue didn't freeze anymore. My pronunciation started to sound smoother, more natural. And sometimes, for a few seconds, I forgot I was speaking a foreign language. It just flowed. Those were magical moments. But the magic didn't come without struggle. There were days when I wanted to give up. My mouth hurt. My brain was tired. Sometimes I repeated one line 50 times and still couldn't get it right. But every time I wanted to stop, I reminded myself, this is the sound of progress. Fluency is not built in silence. It's built in repetition, in mistakes, in practice. So I kept going. I created a small routine. I called it the 3 steps of flow. First, listen. Not for meaning, but for rhythm. Second, shadow. Repeat with the speaker, even if I made mistakes. Third, reflect. record myself, and listen back. The first time I listened to my own recording, I laughed. It sounded strange, broken, sometimes funny. But I didn't stop. Because every time I recorded again, it sounded a little better. A little smoother. A little more me. And that feeling of hearing your own progress is one of the most beautiful feelings in the world. One evening, Tom called me and said, "Leo, come to the cafe tomorrow. I want to show you something." When I arrived, he had his laptop open. He said, "We're going to do a new exercise today, listening with imagination." He played a short scene from a movie, a conversation between two friends. He paused it and said, "Now tell me what you feel when you listen." I listened carefully. One voice sounded soft and kind, the other nervous and unsure. I said, "The first one sounds like he's trying to help. The other sounds scared." Tom smiled. "Good. You're not just hearing words, you're hearing emotions." Then he said, "Now repeat their lines. But don't just copy their words, copy their feelings." I hesitated, but tried. I repeated the lines, trying to sound kind, then scared, just like the actors. At first it felt silly. But as I spoke, I could feel my English changing. It was no longer flat or robotic. It was alive. Tom nodded. "That's it, Leo. English is not about what you say. It's about how you say it." That became one of my favorite lessons. Because once I started practicing emotion, my confidence grew faster than ever. When I spoke to people, I wasn't afraid of making mistakes. Because I was focused on connection. If they felt what I said, it didn't matter if my grammar wasn't perfect. I started to notice how emotion could change meaning. For example, the same words, "I'm fine," could mean many things. Said softly, it means peace. Said quickly, it means you're busy. Said with a sigh, it means you're tired or sad. That realization changed my whole relationship with English. I started to see it as music. Each sentence had a rhythm, a melody, a heartbeat. And the more I practiced, the more I could feel that heartbeat. Soon, people began to notice. My friends at the club said, "Leo, your English sounds so natural now." I smiled. It wasn't because I had learned hundreds of new words. It was because I had learned how to use the ones I already knew, with rhythm and emotion. I remember one day, a new member joined the club. He was shy, just like I used to be. He said, "I understand everything, but when I speak, nothing comes out." I smiled and said, "That was me, not long ago." He looked surprised. "Really?" "Yes," I said. But I found something that helped: shadowing and storytelling. I showed him how I listened, repeated, recorded, and practiced emotion. He tried it, and I saw the same spark in his eyes that I once had. And that's when I realized I was no longer just learning. I was teaching. Even if only in small ways. Even if only by sharing my journey. Every time I practiced, I felt more connected, not only to English, but to myself. Because through English, I discovered my voice. Through storytelling, I discovered confidence. And through emotion, I discovered connection. I began to enjoy my daily practice like a quiet meditation. In the morning, I would listen and shadow for 15 minutes. In the afternoon, I would tell one small story out loud, something simple, like what I saw at the park or what I learned that day. And before sleeping, I would play my recordings, smile, and whisper, "Tomorrow, I'll sound even better." That rhythm became my comfort. And slowly, my English stopped feeling foreign. It started to feel like a friend. A voice I could trust. There was one night I will never forget. I was walking home under a sky full of stars, listening to an English podcast in my earphones. The speaker said something about finding peace in practice. And I remember whispering, "Yes, that's exactly it." For the first time, I replied to a voice from across the world, not as a student, but as a friend. That moment felt small but powerful. because it wasn't about language anymore. It was about belonging. That's what English gave me, a bridge between my world and the world beyond. And every time I practiced, I felt that bridge grow stronger. Sometimes people ask me, how long did it take you to become fluent? And I always smile. Because it's not about time. It's about practice with feeling. When you practice with emotion, every minute is valuable. Every sentence you speak is a step closer to fluency. So if you're listening now, I want you to remember this. Don't wait for the perfect word. Don't wait to be ready. Just start speaking with your heart. Shadow what you love. Listen deeply. Tell your small stories every day. Because one day, without even noticing, you'll wake up and realize that English has become a part of you. That's what happened to me. It didn't happen suddenly. It happened quietly, one story, one sentence, one emotion at a time. When I look back now, the practice was the bridge between fear and confidence. It was the time when I stopped studying English and started living it. When I stopped memorizing and started feeling. When I stopped doubting my voice and started trusting it. Because fluency is not a moment you reach. It's a rhythm you build. It's a voice you grow. It's a practice you live. There comes a day in every learner's life when all the small pieces suddenly fit together. Not perfectly, not magically, but beautifully enough. That day came for me one afternoon, when the sky was clear, the air was soft, and I didn't expect anything special to happen. But sometimes, life changes on ordinary days. It started with a message. A friend from the English club, Maria, texted me, "Hey Leo. There's an international event downtown tonight, people from many countries, all speaking English. Come with me." I stared at the message for a long time. My first thought was no. Too many people. Too much English. What if I forget words? What if I freeze? What if I embarrass myself? But then I remembered Tom's voice in my head. English is a river to flow with. And another memory appeared, my own voice, practicing, recording, improving. I realized maybe it was time to test everything I had learned. So I took a deep breath and replied, "Okay, I'll come." That evening, I stood outside a small cafe full of people speaking English. I could hear laughter, music, conversations mixing together like waves. My heart was beating fast. I almost turned back. But then I saw Maria smiling at the door. She waved. "Come on, Leo. Let's go in." So I did. Inside, the air was warm and full of energy. People were talking in groups, sharing stories about travel, work, dreams. I listened for a few minutes, trying to catch every word, but soon, I remembered what Tom had taught me. Don't focus on words. Focus on rhythm. So I relaxed. I let the sounds wash over me. And slowly, the fear began to fade. Maria introduced me to a few people. One was from Brazil, one from Korea, another from Canada. They all spoke English, different accents, different rhythms, but the same desire to connect. When it was my turn to speak, I hesitated for a moment. My mind went blank. Then I smiled and said, "Hi, I'm Leo. I'm still learning, but I love practicing." They smiled back. The Canadian said, "That's awesome, man. Your English sounds great." And just like that, something opened inside me, a small door of confidence. We started talking about travel. I told them about my city, the food, the places I loved. At first, I spoke slowly. But soon, I forgot to be afraid. The words came naturally, not perfect, but real. I laughed, I listened, I asked questions. It felt like music. For the first time, I wasn't performing English. I was living it. I remember looking around that cafe, all those people from different countries, different backgrounds, and realizing that English was not about grammar or tests. It was about connection. It was about understanding and being understood. It was about sharing yourself. That night, I told stories, small, simple stories. I used the same techniques I had practiced for months: emotion, rhythm, pauses, flow. And it worked. People laughed, nodded, reacted. They felt my words. And I felt theirs. At one point, someone asked me, Leo, how did you learn to speak like that? I smiled and said, by listening, feeling, and practicing stories every day. They looked surprised. But it was true. That night became a turning point, not because I spoke perfectly, but because I stopped caring about being perfect. I cared about connection instead. Later, when the event was ending, a man from Germany came up to me. He said, you know, when you speak, your English has this warmth. It feels calm. I smiled shyly and said, thank you. That means a lot. He nodded. It's not about accent. It's about energy. You have that. As I walked home under the night sky, I felt something inside me, peace. Not the loud kind, not excitement, just quiet peace. Because I had finally experienced fluency, not perfect English, but natural English. The kind that flows from your heart, not your textbook. When I got home, I opened my small notebook, the one where I had written my mistakes months ago. I read the first page. The sentences were broken, shy, uncertain. And then I looked at the last page, smoother, confident, expressive. And I smiled. Every mistake had brought me here. Every struggle had shaped this moment. Then, almost without thinking, I pressed record on my phone and started speaking to myself. I said, today I spoke English freely. I laughed. I shared my story. I wasn't perfect, but I was real. And maybe that's what English is for, not to sound perfect, but to sound alive. When I listened to the recording later, I felt tears in my eyes. Not because I was sad, but because I was proud. I could hear my journey in my voice. The rhythm, the warmth, the courage. That was the moment I realized something important. You don't find your English voice in one big lesson. You find it in every small step, every time you speak, every time you fail, every time you try again. Because English fluency is not a skill. It's a relationship between you, your voice, and the world. And that relationship grows with love, not fear. A few weeks later, Tom and I met again at the cafe. He smiled when he saw me. So, he said, how did it go? I told him everything: the event, the conversations, the laughter. He listened quietly, just like always. When I finished, he nodded. I told you, Leo, he said, you were ready. You just needed to trust the flow. I laughed. You were right. He said, now you know the secret, don't you? I tilted my head. What secret? He leaned forward and said softly, the moment you stop trying to sound perfect, you start to sound real. And real is always better. I never forgot those words. That evening, as the sun went down, I looked at my tea and thought about my journey from the shy beginner who couldn't speak, to the learner who practiced emotion, to the speaker who found his voice. And I realized something: I wasn't just learning English. I was learning myself. Learning how to be patient. How to express. How to listen. How to connect. How to live with flow. That was the real transformation, not in my pronunciation, but in my heart. Sometimes I still make mistakes. Sometimes I forget words. But now I smile when it happens. Because every mistake is just another wave in the river. It passes, it flows, and I keep speaking. I still listen to podcasts. I still shadow movies. I still tell stories. But now it's not practice, it's pleasure. Because English has become a part of who I am. And maybe that's what true fluency is, when the language you learn becomes the language you feel. When your English voice is no longer separate from you, but a natural part of your life, your rhythm, your heart. That night, before sleeping, I wrote one last note in my journal. I don't study English anymore. I live it. And every time I speak, I am not just using a language, I am sharing a piece of my soul. It's strange how quiet life feels after a big change. When I woke up the next morning, after that unforgettable night at the cafe, the world looked the same streets, the same sounds, the same morning air, but something inside me had shifted. It was small, but powerful. It was the quiet confidence that comes when you finally stop fighting with yourself. I sat by the window, holding my cup of coffee, and I started thinking about my journey. About the first day I tried to say a full sentence in English and couldn't. About the fear that froze my words. About the people who helped me, the mistakes I made, the nights I wanted to quit. And I realized every part of it mattered. When you learn a language, you're not just learning words. You're learning patience. You're learning courage. You're learning how to be okay with not being perfect. At the beginning, I thought English was a mountain. Big, scary, impossible. But now I see it's not a mountain. It's a path. A long, winding path where you take one small step every day. Sometimes you walk fast, sometimes you fall, sometimes you rest. But if you keep moving, you reach a place you never thought you could. And maybe the real secret is not speed, but consistency. I remember Tom once said to me, "Fluency is not a talent, Leo. It's a rhythm. You don't master it, you move with it." At first, I didn't understand. But now I do. Every morning I listened. Every night I practiced. Even when I didn't feel like it, I showed up. And over time, English became my friend. A friend that listened, that stayed with me, that slowly changed how I saw the world. Because language, any language, is more than communication. It's connection. It's identity. It's emotion. When I finally found my English voice, I also found myself. I found that I could be confident, that I could be expressive, that I could stand in a room of strangers and still belong. Not because I spoke perfectly, but because I spoke honestly. I used to think my accent was a weakness. Now, I see it as a story. Every sound I make carries my past, my hometown, my family, my culture. And that makes my English unique. So, if you're listening to me right now, maybe you're a student, a worker, a traveler, someone who just wants to feel confident in English, I want to tell you something important. Don't hide your voice. Don't wait until you're ready. Because you'll never feel completely ready. You just start. And you grow along the way. I remember how, in the early days, I always compared myself to others. I'd listen to native speakers and think, "I'll never sound like that." But one day, I realized I don't need to sound like them. I need to sound like me. My version of English. Clear. Honest. Alive. And that thought changed everything. The moment you stop chasing perfection, you start discovering your own rhythm. And rhythm is what makes your English beautiful. Because when you speak with emotion, people don't hear your mistakes. They hear your heart. A few weeks later, I met a new learner at the English club. He was shy, just like I used to be. He said, "Leo, I want to speak like you. But I can't. I'm too nervous." I smiled and said, "You already sound like me, you just don't know it yet." He looked confused. I continued, "Because I was you. And one day, you'll be me. You just have to keep walking." He laughed softly. Then he said, "But what if people laugh at me?" I said, "Then you laugh too. That's how you take away fear." We practiced together for a while. And as I listened to him struggle through his words, I saw something familiar, not weakness, but courage. The same courage I had when I first tried to speak. And I realized, maybe the purpose of learning is not just to grow ourselves, but to help others grow too. Because when you share your story, you give someone else the strength to begin theirs. Now, whenever I think about English, I don't think about rules or exams anymore. I think about moments. The moment I understood my first joke in English. The moment I made someone laugh. The moment I spoke without translating. The moment I listened and truly felt what someone was saying. Those are the moments that make it all worth it. And if I could go back and talk to my younger self, that shy boy who was afraid to speak, I'd tell him this. Don't be scared of mistakes. Be scared of silence. Because silence is where dreams go to sleep. Every time you speak, even if it's wrong, you wake your dream up again. Sometimes, people ask me, Leo, what's the best way to become fluent? And I always say the same thing. Tell your story. Tell it in English. Even if it's broken. Even if it's slow. Even if nobody listens at first. Because when you tell your story, you make English yours. That's what I did. That's what changed everything. Now, when I speak, I don't think about grammar. I think about feelings. I think about rhythm. I think about connection. Because English, for me, is no longer a subject. It's a mirror showing me who I am becoming. That morning by the window, I closed my eyes and imagined all the versions of myself I had been, the silent one, the nervous one, the practicing one, the confident one, and finally, the one who speaks freely. All of them were me. And all of them were necessary. Sometimes, we want to skip the hard parts, the mistakes, the long practice hours, the embarrassment. But those parts are the real teachers. They're what make your English and your story powerful. So, if you're listening right now, please remember this. You don't have to be perfect to be proud. You just have to be real. Because real English, the kind that moves people, doesn't come from your mouth. It comes from your heart. That night, I recorded another short message for myself, just a few words before bed. I said, today, I'm grateful for my journey. For the mistakes, for the lessons, for the voice I've found. I'm still learning, but I'm no longer afraid. And as I listened to my own voice, I smiled, because I could hear peace in it. And that peace, that calm confidence, was what I had been searching for all along. Learning English didn't just teach me how to talk. It taught me how to listen. To others. To the world. To myself. It taught me how to slow down. How to appreciate small progress. How to find beauty in trying. And maybe that's what learning is really about, not reaching a goal, but enjoying the path. Because the path never really ends. You just keep walking, keep speaking, keep discovering. And every time you do, your world grows a little bigger. As I finish this reflection, I want to leave you with one final thought. English is not a wall to climb. It's a bridge. A bridge that connects you to people, ideas, and dreams you've never known before. And when you cross it slowly, bravely, step by step, you don't just find a new language. You find a new you. So wherever you are, whoever you are, don't give up. Keep listening. Keep speaking. Keep feeling. Because one day, you'll wake up, look in the mirror, and realize you don't just speak English now. You live it. And that is the real meaning of fluency. It was a quiet morning. The kind of morning where everything feels still. The air, the sky, even time itself. I walked to the same park where I used to sit months ago, back when I was afraid to speak. The bench was still there. The trees were the same. But I was not. I sat down, took a deep breath, and for a few minutes, I just listened. The sound of children laughing. The soft wind moving through the leaves. The rhythm of footsteps passing by. And for the first time, I felt that all these sounds were connected, like a language of the world itself. Then I remembered something Tom had once told me. Leo, English is not only spoken with your mouth. It's spoken with your soul. I didn't understand it then. But now, sitting on that bench, I finally did. Because I realized I no longer studied English. I lived it. It was in my thoughts, my dreams, my songs, my laughter. It had become a part of my voice, not something I borrowed, but something I owned. Later that day, I met Tom again. We sat by the same cafe window where everything had begun. The light was soft, golden. People were talking quietly around us. It felt peaceful. Tom smiled when he saw me. So he said, "How's your English river flowing these days?" I laughed. "Still flowing. Maybe a little stronger now." He nodded. "I can see that. You've changed, Leo." I looked down at my cup thinking. "Yeah," I said softly. "It's strange. I thought learning English would just make me better at speaking. But it made me better at being." Tom leaned back, his eyes calm. "That's what real learning does. It changes your heart before it changes your words." For a few moments, we didn't speak. We just sat there, listening to the hum of the cafe, the soft sounds of life. Then I asked, "Tom, when do you think someone becomes fluent?" He smiled, the kind of smile that hides 1,000 answers. "Fluent," he said. "You become fluent the day you stop counting your mistakes and start counting your stories." I nodded slowly. That sentence stayed in my heart like a melody. After we said goodbye, I walked home with a strange feeling, not excitement, not pride, but peace. Because I knew I had finally found what I had been looking for all this time, my voice. It wasn't loud or perfect. It wasn't like anyone else's. But it was mine. And when you finally find your voice, in English or in life, the world begins to listen differently. Not because your grammar is perfect, but because your heart is open. That evening, I recorded one final message for myself. I wanted to capture how it felt to reach this point. I pressed record and said, "My name is Jara. And today, I'm not afraid to speak anymore. My English isn't perfect, but it's alive. It carries my story, my emotion, my truth. I've learned that fluency isn't about speed or words, it's about connection. And I am grateful for every mistake that helped me reach this place." When I finished, I paused the recording and listened to my voice. It sounded calm, warm, confident, real. And I smiled. Because for the first time, I truly heard myself. In the following weeks, I kept speaking with friends, with strangers, sometimes even to myself. But now I spoke with joy. Not fear. Not pressure. Just joy. I started helping others who were learning, just like Tom helped me. I told them my story, my struggles, my little tricks, shadowing, rhythm, feeling the emotion in every line. And every time I saw that spark in their eyes, that small glow of hope, I felt something magical. Because I knew what that spark meant. It meant they were beginning to believe in themselves. That's the most beautiful part of finding your voice. You help others find theirs too. One day, months later, Maria invited me to speak at another English club event, this time as a guest speaker. I laughed when she asked, "Me? Speak in front of everyone?" She smiled and said, "Yes, Leo. You've got stories worth sharing." At first, I felt nervous again. But then I remembered, nerves are just energy waiting to become excitement. So I said yes. That night, I stood in front of a small group of learners, some confident, some shy, some just beginning. I looked at their faces and saw my old self in each of them. And I said, slowly, clearly, "I used to be afraid to speak. I used to think English was too hard for me. But I learned something important. English doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to everyone who wants to connect. It belongs to you." The room was silent. Everyone listened. And I continued. "When you speak, don't think about mistakes. Think about meaning. Think about emotion. Because people don't remember perfect sentences. They remember how you made them feel." When I finished, people clapped softly. Some even smiled with tears in their eyes. And in that moment, I felt the circle complete, from learner to speaker, from silence to story. I had found my voice. And I had shared it. After the event, a young woman came up to me. Her voice was shaking when she said, "Leo, your story gave me hope. I was going to quit learning English, but now I think I'll try again." I smiled and said, "Then you've already won. Because trying again is where real courage begins." She laughed, a little tear in her eye, and said, I hope one day I can speak like you. I said, you already can. You just don't believe it yet. And I meant it. That night, walking home under the city lights, I thought about how everything had started: the fear, the first word, the silence, the mentor, the practice, the flow, the transformation. And now the voice. Every step had led here. And I realized something simple but powerful. You don't find your English voice by looking for it. You find it by living it. By using it every day, by speaking even when you're scared, by listening with your heart open. And one day, you wake up and realize you're not speaking in English anymore. You're speaking through it. It's no longer something outside you. It's you. So, if you're listening to this now, wherever you are in your journey, I want you to remember this. Your voice matters. Even if it shakes. Even if it breaks. Even if it's quiet. Because your English is not a copy of anyone else's. It's your story carried in sound. And your story deserves to be heard. Maybe today your English feels slow. Maybe your words don't come easily. Maybe your confidence fades when you speak. That's okay. Every fluent speaker once felt that way too. Including me. Including everyone you admire. Fluency doesn't start with perfect sentences. It starts with brave ones. So speak. Even if it's simple. Even if it's short. Even if it's imperfect. Because every time you speak, you plant a seed that will one day grow into your own beautiful, confident voice. And when that day comes, when you speak and feel the words flowing like music, you'll look back and realize it was never about English. It was about becoming yourself. A version of you who is not afraid to express, to connect, to live in another language. Because when you find your voice in English or in life, you don't just speak. You shine. This was my story. Thank you for listening, my friend. Now go tell yours.